Hi everyone. So as you might have guessed after this little introduction, I'm not doing a quadrillion% more DPS because of the Stone of Jordan that I'm wearing for my Unhallowed Essence set. And this is how I want to introduce you to this topic of damage multipliers. And this is like one of the typical questions that I get. And I hope that this video will clear something up in that case here. So what you need to know about damage multipliers is that there are different damage multiplier categories. And you usually try to stack up as many multipliers as possible. And there are some things that stack together in the same category, and there are things that are typically their own category. This especially includes certain passive skills and most of the legendary affixes. And there is one big category, which is called the additive category. And essentially, it's also a multiplier on its own, but there are a lot of things that go into this category, which is why it's called additive, because you add them together as one multiplier number, and then you multiply, all the other stuff with it. So this additive damage category is the same as the damage increased by skills that you can see in your character details here. But the thing is, this is a little bit misguiding, because most of the debuffs that you put on enemies are also in the same category, and this is not shown in your character sheet because it's on the enemy. So when you have something like Marked for Death, for example, it's 15% increased damage by skills, but you can't see it here. Also, when you have skill damage bonuses on your items, for example, you have 15% multi-shot on your boots and your helm, this is the same as damage increased by skills, which is also the additive category. And this is the same for all of the skills in the game, so it doesn't matter if the rolls on your quiver or on the chest or on the shoulder or whatever. But for pet skills specifically, it's a multiplier. So this is some kind of like special scenario for pets, but for every other skill, it's an additive category. And this is like the kind of big category that stacks up quite a lot, especially in group play, because you have a lot of things that go into that, but more on that later. So just in general, how can you see that something is a multiplier and how can you see that something is additive? And the easiest way to do this is in D3 Planner. So D3 Planner usually has these things, right? So we have, for example, here, we have this setup here for my Demon Hunter. And if you go over the damage for this entangling shot, you have these different categories now and the multipliers. You have dexterity, so your main stat is one big multiplier. You get 1% per point of main stat. And when you have like 20k main stat, this is 20,000%. So this is times 200. And then you have a skill multiplier, which is just the weapon damage. That's also its own category, so whatever number you see in the tooltip. And then we have the damage increased by skills, which is the additive category. And in that case, here we have the Mark for Death, and we have 15% from the pants, and this goes into another one. And then we have elemental damage, that's also its own category. In this case, it's coming from the Stone of Jordan, but this also includes stuff like the braces, the amulet rolls, and Mage Fist, Frostburn, and also Mask of Jerem. That's a special case for Witch Doctor. Mask of Jerem is the same as elemental damage, which is also the reason why elemental damage is not really that important on the amulet for Witch Doctors, at least in the current patch. And here we already see the Unhallowed Essence set, 60%. This is the 4-piece bonus, and this is its own separate value. And then we have the 6-piece bonus that also has its own multiplier again. So you can see this here, Unhallowed Essence 60%, and then Unhallowed Essence 24,500%. And you can see on the top in the formula, and it's in the fourth line there, this is essentially taking those percent values and multiplying the damage with it. So it takes the weapon damage, which is just the roll you have here, plus whatever you have on the rings from average damage, or your amulet perhaps. And then it's just simply multiplying by exactly all those values. And if you do this manually, we'll get exactly the same values. So here, this dexterity multiplier, 6,450, is this times 65.5, skill multiplier times 2. Then you have damage increased by skills, this is 1.3, elemental damage 1.17, Unhallowed Essence 1.6, and so on. So this list can get quite long when you have like a real build. So if you look at something like this, you see there's a lot of stuff that actually goes into this. You have, the gems, you have your different sets, you have some skills, maybe there's wolf, passives, and so on. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. And generally, multiplying stuff is better than adding stuff. So you want to have as many multipliers as possible. So if you have the same values, let's say you have 20% damage bonus here and another 20% bonus here, the effect is higher when you multiply them instead of when you add them together. And this is, I can show this quite easily here. So you have 1.2, which is 20% boost. And then we have another times 1.2, and this is 1.44. So this means 44% boost total. And if you just add them together, essentially 20 plus 20 divided by 100, so it will be just 1.4. And the difference here, if you divide those two numbers, is 2.8%, 2.85. Yeah, and this phenomenon just increases the more multipliers you add. When you have all these numbers here, like 40% vengeance, 20% call the weak, 40% ambush, and so on, it stacks up quite a lot. And this is how you even get to these insanely high damage values in the game. And here I've prepared a few defeat planners to show you like a little bit of the details of the different classes and different builds and so on. But yeah, this is not 100% complete. And if there's anything missing, like just put it in a comment or something, and then I could add it there. But just to give you like the basics of most of the classes, just from like my memory essentially. So here's Demon Hunter first. So we have mostly additive buffs, but there's also some multipliers. So Mark for Death is additive. We have Entangling Shot with Odyssey's End, additive. This might change in the next patch, but probably not. We have Wolf Companion, multiplicative. This is pretty good. We have also stuff like Multi-Shot with 8% crit boost. Crit buffs are also like on some other classes like the Wizard, and they are usually quite good, so you can expect a little bit more than 1% damage boost per percent crit. So typically crit buffs are quite nice. Then we have Archery with bows is additive, so it's pretty weak. We have Ambush, multiplicative. We have Steady Aim, multiplicative. Call the Weak, multiplicative. And that's about it for the Demon Hunter passes. And yeah, there's that. We also have, for example, these big additive items like Strafe, Kmos 10 Clip, and Wonders Bequest. So this is the same as, rolling 15% multi-shot in a quiver or something. So this is nothing really special. But legendary affixes are generally worth a lot more. So we have, for example, Yang's V-Curve, and like almost every legendary affix is a multiplier. This is why they are so good. So for example, here we have multi-shot, damage is increased by 200%. This is the multiplier, Demon's Legacy is a multiplier, and so on. As I said, like most of the, especially sets and these big items are multipliers generally, because they also only work for your build and so on. The one big exception to that, probably out of all builds, is the Vojani Assaulter. This is specific to rapid fire builds. This one is additive. So you don't have to roll 15% rapid fire on your boots or your helm. It's almost pointless because you get 3000% additive. So there's also no point in taking Mark for Death or anything like that. So yeah, this is just this one example here that I know, and I don't think there's much more to that. Next, Witch Doctor. Witch Doctor doesn't have any multipliers besides this intelligence bonuses. So we have Soul Harvest, which gives you intelligence. We have Gruesome Feast, and this kind of is like a multiplier because intelligence itself is a multiplier, and if you increase that value, then you basically get another multiplier here. But if you put them both together, they're both additive intelligence buffs. So when you have 5 stacks of Gruesome Feast, you have 50%. 5 stacks of Soul Harvest is 15%. So it's a total bonus of 65. But yeah, since it's only so few different values, it doesn't really take away very much. So this is just something to note here. Otherwise, we have additive, 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 additive. We have Confidence Ritual, which is very strong because it's a multiplier. Pierce the Veil is additive. And this is about it. And the Mask of Jara I mentioned already, this is like elemental damage. Wizard, we have Magic Weapon, additive. Weight of Force, I believe there's a multiplier. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't played Bazooka myself, but pretty sure it is. We have additive Frost Nova. We have additive Disintegrate, additive Slow Time. Unwavering Will is additive. Elemental Exposure. We have Audacity multiplicative, same as Power Hungry. Glass Cannon additive. Cold-Blooded additive. And we also have Archon. Archon is also a multiplier. It gives you 6% per stack. This is also like one of the reasons why Bazooka was so good with Azula and so on, why these builds exist. But since these Archon stacks are usually quite many, It's like one big multiplier category, but as you add more Archon stacks, the more you add, the weaker each stack becomes. So eventually, you won't notice like another 6% after having like, 600% already. So, you kind of also have to see that, the more Archon stacks you have. So here we have the Barbarian. So this is probably quite important because it's also like the main support class in the game. And also you can take a look at the support items here. So you have strong arm bracers, additive, and they stack. We have Oculus Ring, multiplicative, Toxin Gem, additive, Ice Blink is crit chance again, so it's pretty nice. Just in terms of gems anyway, we have 2 additive gems, which is the Toxin and the Teguk, and all the other gems are multipliers. So this is also something worth mentioning here. We have Falter, which is additive, War of the Berserker, multiplicative, and crit chance, pretty nice. Battle Rage, additive. We have Rend, additive. Ruthless, multiplicative. This is additive. Here the swords is kind of like the archery for Demon Hunter, it's also additive, so really weak. Brawler, additive. And this is about it. Rampage is usually quite nice. It's kind of like a Witch Doctor with the intelligence multipliers. And this is essentially when you have 25 stacks, especially for like speed farming builds, extremely strong because strength gives you like 25 stacks, 25% damage multiplier, and you gain toughness on top of that. So really, really good. And we also have the Overwhelming Desire. It's not really used for any build anymore, but there were some times in the past. It's also an additive bonus. You have Monk. Monk is like the other support in the game, and there's also some other builds that use their own multipliers. So we have Way of the 100 Fist, especially. This is additive, and you can do a lot of extra damage because of this in some builds when you can include it. We have Crippling Wave, additive. We have Annihilation, additive. Exploding Palm, additive. Additive, additive. And here, Determination, I think is also additive. Momentum is additive. We have Relentless. This is multiplier. We have Mythic Rhythm, also a multiplier. This is extremely strong, especially Uliana builds use this, but there's probably like a few more where you can do this. This is something for Tempest Rush, for example, and really, really good to have. You also have Unity, which is used by some support monks. It gives you 5% additive damage to your DPS in a party. And there's also Combination Strike, that's also additive. There are also these attack speed buffs. For example, Seized Initiative. This is generally one of the better passes as well, because 30% attack speed is no joke. And generally, attack speed is all counted together as kind of like a DPS, like barring like resource issues and so on. But if you have like a build that continuously attacks and you add 30% attack speed and you have 0 before, it's essentially a 30% multiplier. But typically you have at least 10% attack speed from Paragons. If you're running a Quiver, you have like another 20% there and so on. So you might have like a few buffs already. And here again, you have to count the attack speeds together. So this 30% buff here is realistically a little bit less than that, but something like at least 20%. Still pretty nice. But there are some other passives like Alacrity that buff the attack speed of certain skills only, and I believe they are generally multipliers. So it's also why they're really good, especially for like Rift Guardian killing setups. You stack more Stricken with those. So for example, like Corpse and Necro also have like such a passive for Grim Scythe, and this is what they use to stack Stricken, and then they do the damage with the Corpse Lens Nuke, for example. You have Crusader. Crusader doesn't have very much. We have the Shield Glare, additive, Akarat's Champion, multiplicative. We have Heavenly Strength. This is minus 20% additive, so it's not really a big deal. We have Holy Cause, additive. We have Blunt. This is also additive. We have Towering Shield is also additive. So there's not really that much here. Finery is again like this the strength buff, one of the better ones because you can get a lot of strength from this. And this is about it here. And then finally the Necromancer literally doesn't have anything. There's Spreading Malediction. This is 20% multiplier, and this is about it. So as I said, you can generally look at those things in the free planner if you're not sure about what is really in which category, which passive to choose, and so on. So this will help you out. Import a character, or check out some link from a guide or something, and then you can like change a few things and play around with it. One special thing is for Thorns build specifically. For example, the Necro Thorns build, the additive damage buffs and the additive damage debuffs are actually two separate categories. And this is very specific to those builds. So when you have something like the Witch Doctor Voodoo with Slam Dance, 15% damage buff to the party, and this is additive. And then you have, let's say, Strong Embracers and Macro Death on the enemy. This is 30 and 15% additive debuffs. If you count them together, usually it would be 60% damage buff. But in the case of Thorns builds, you actually multiply them. So it's times 1.15 from the Voodoo, and then times 1.45 from the Strong Arm plus Mark for Death. So this is very special there, but as far as I know, this doesn't apply to builds that use hack. So like Invoker, for example, there hack is kind of like applied as normal damage, and it works the same way as any other skill. But for like regular Thorns, when enemies hit you, this has like this special interaction here. And finally, I can also show you how you can test the stuff in-game. It's not really rocket science, it's rather simple, and it takes like a minute or so to find out, about, how something works generally. So what you have to do is, you have to make sure that you have like the same damage on every hit, and you can do this very easily with a starter weapon. So you take the level 1 weapon, or you can also craft like a low level weapon at the blacksmith. You put a big ruby on it, and you see now that the damage range is very small. We have 272 to 273. So the difference between the minimum and maximum is like 0.3% or so. So you can expect the same damage every time you hit. Just make sure that you have like no variable damage, something like convention that might mess up the numbers, or Zays, or this kind of stuff, and also no ring with average damage or offhand. And then you will always see the same number. And then you like to go to Old Ruins, and you can just look at the zombie here. Some people like to go to Gardens of Hope. There's usually this Corrupt Growth, so you can just keep hitting this one, and then you see the numbers. 100. This is 11.9 million. This is the crit now. Here's 11.9 million, 11.9, and so on. So you always do the same number, and then you can change the passive, for example, to steady aim, and then you see that the damage will increase exactly by 20%. And then you can take another passive if you want, like Color Weak. So now this one is active, and you see the damage is like around 40 million now probably, 40.3. And now Color Weak should kick in any second. Turns out you can't apply slurs to Corrupt Growth. But we have this guy here, and what? And when you hit them, you see that the damage is 16.8, 17.1, and so on. So here you can clearly see that it's like another times 1.2. And if you take those numbers, let's say 17.2, we divide this by 1.2, we should get back to the value that we had before the Color Weak. And this is the 40.3. And if you divide this again by 1.2, we're back to the 11.9. Yeah. So you see like there's some decimals that are not really shown here. So if you want to do this a little bit more accurate, then you would have to do like the full damage numbers. But generally, it's very easy to see what is multiplicative and what not, especially when you stack like a lot of other multipliers and so on. So this is how you have to do it. And then it just takes like a few seconds essentially to check this out when you have this weapon in your stash already. And this is how to do it. So the main takeaway here is that be aware of what the damage categories are. What is the good multipliers was the bad additive damage buffs and so on. And generally you want to apply most of those. It's also one of the reasons why Focus and Restraint is so good. For example, Focus and Restraint are also their own multipliers, just like most of the other rings, like Crispin, Convention, whatever. So this means that for each Focus and Restraint buff, you have to take your damage times 1.5 and then times 1.5 again. And then for Convention, it's times 3 and so on. So this is how you get to those ridiculous numbers in the end. Just one big value, like something on the Unhallowed Essence set where you have like 350% and you have 86 discipline. So you have like 30,000% damage buff. This is not really impressive, because you still need to stack up many more multipliers, and when you have like this 30,000% buff, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's really strong, because you still need a lot of other stuff to actually make a strong build. So this is what I wanted to show here, and I hope you learned a little bit from this. I hope you liked this video. I'll see you guys next time.